If it had been
Right,
any other
right.
branch,
yeah.
oh my goodness, they'd have burnt down the base. Marines eat it. We'll be fine.
Right? You try to give Air Force some moldy sandwiches, I think we wouldn't
They're
have an
like,
Air Force left.
they're
at
calling
this
the
point,
lobster. That was it. That lobster truck. That you better bring that truck on in. We ain't eating this moldy sandwich.
Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Scuttlebutt. I am your host, Shaun, the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club, a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, PA. The Scuttlebutt is here to highlight recent military headlines. And joining us today are the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, Todd DiPastino.
Hello.
Marine Corps veteran, James Martin.
Good morning.
And Navy veteran, Lauren Del Ricci. How are you?
Good. Ahoy, ahoy.
Ahoy, ahoy. We want to jump right into our headlines. And first up is an explosive article that was first published by Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, alleging President Trump disparaged servicemen killed in action as losers and suckers. So we're not really here to debate whether President Trump said or didn't say what the article claims. But we want to turn our focus to an eye-opening headline about the results of the recent Military Times Institute for Veterans and Military Families, the IVMF poll of 1,018 active duty personnel. And this poll was done between July 27th and August 10th. And it highlighted some very interesting things that was sort of a separate headline than the big time Atlantic article, but also gave us a bit of insight into what the military is thinking about President Trump at this time. At least it seems so, because we wanted to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at some of the numbers and who also took this poll. A straight up headline right here from the poll is, the unfavorability of Trump has risen dramatically since 2017 from 37% to 50%. At 42%, it's very unfavorable. And his favorability has fallen from 46% to 38%. Todd, a lot of these numbers seem very interesting, especially coming out of a military that skews conservative, correct?
Right. Yes. Yeah. The military has been reliably Republican and conservative for a while. It's a conservative vote in presidential elections. So it is surprising that a president who has created the largest defense budget in history for past 75 years, since World War II, a president that has kind of approved 3% pay increases across the board in the military 2 years running. If I had told you that a Republican president had done those two things, you would think that his approval rating would be, 70%, 75% in the military. So it is shocking that his disapproval rating would be 50%. I do want to say also that this poll, this Military Times IVMF Syracuse University poll, is not really a cross-section of active duty military. It's a self-selected group. It's about 1,000 subscribers to the Military Times. The average age of the person who took the poll is 39 years old.
Which is old for the military.
Which is old for the military. young for me, old for the military. Yeah, considering that, the average age in the military is 29 years old. So the people who tend to subscribe to Military Times are career military. They're the officers, they're the senior NCOs. So junior enlisted, we assume, are not really represented in this poll.
Mm-hmm. And that would probably lead us to believe that the officers have a more unfavorable view of President Trump. And it seems to me that officers, are they more Republican? Are junior enlisted more Democrat? Do we know how that skews? No, James? Yeah.
It's the sheer fact of prefrontal cortex. You're after a certain point when you hit in your career, once you hit like that E6, when you start to hit that staff level, your viewpoints have to change. There's a maturity level that you have to bring, that you have to realize, even just in straight leadership, I can't deal with everybody the same way that I used to. I have to understand where people come from, the backgrounds and everything else. So you start to get a whole view picture. Like, I know where this guy comes from. He's either from the country, he's from the city, you know, he's a rodeo player, he plays football, you know, he had his family, this guy had no parents in foster home. How you deal with people is different. So when you have someone who is supposed to be the top person in leadership, we start to focus on everything, not just about what he does. So the budget and everything else, that's great. The things he's done as far as veterans health, absolutely outstanding. Can't knock him for it. I've said this before, but is he the kind of person I would trust around? Would I bring him to Thanksgiving dinner? No, you can't come to my house, because you're liable to say something that's going to get me punched in the face by my mother. So that's not going to work. And when you have that, and because the poll said it, you said it right, 39 years old, you are virtually ancient in today's military. You are old.
Mm-hmm.
That group of people has a larger view on not just a tactic or a mission, but we're looking at future missions. We're looking at growth of the Marine Corps, the Navy, our ship, our unit. How are we going to become the greatest at whatever we do? And sometimes it's not just our actions, but what we say, how we say it, when we do it, this, that, and another. When you're talking about somebody who allegedly said something about people that have fallen and things like that, it's a he said, she said. But even with the alleged, and we could take things that we know that he said in the past, it's a bad look. That's not the way. So those 39-year-olds who understand that science,
Yeah.
we're not a fan.
And does that speak to why there seems to be a turn against Trump then over the last 4 years of this poll? They've done it every year. It's his favorability has sort of fallen. It's like in 2016, they took the poll. His favorability was really high. It was in his first year. Did they just not have the sample size? Did they see his leadership over the course of those 4 years, and you think that's fallen in the military due to that? It's sort of a question that is
if I could take a stab at this. So I love that you brought up the fact that, over time, they've done these polls since 2016, right? So when we were kind of preparing for it, we're poring over the data. And a lot of times when you look at a survey, you're kind of results driven. You want to see like, what's that percentage, but I think it's more important, not more important maybe, but just as important to look at the structure of the questions, if there exists any kind of sampling bias, and, kind of the breakdown of that. And it's interesting to me, and it blasted me back to grad school, where I think the only thing I got below a B was in my research class, honestly. So, take this for what it's worth. But the question in 2016 was, if the election were held tomorrow, who would you pick? In 2020 poll, the question was, if the presidential election were held today, whom would you vote for, right? So in general, the wording of a question is very important when you're talking about surveys. I can pick my nail color, or maybe, pick a friend to go out with, but when you're voting, there's a certain, something that comes with that word, a certain power and a certain obligation. And it's interesting as we look at these polls and how they've unfolded over the years. Yes, he's definitely gone down. There is no question about that. And if you want to take a stab at why, I know that General Mattis resigned at the end of 2018 and going into January 2019. That, I think, if not, has entirely everything to do with it, is one of the major reasons why we see these numbers skewed. And also because right now there's so much going on, right? These surveys that are going out to Military Times readers, and we, I don't know what that, how big that population is and what the sampling bias is there, or the non-response rate and things like that. But when you're talking about questions, and I'm the person sitting here taking a survey, there's something, like maybe a desirability bias, that you think because you're in the military that these are the things that, that I need to write because of that. But also this poll asked about how the president's responding to COVID. as well as a couple other, really kind of deep, dark, scary questions. So I would love to see the survey and see how they were written and what order they went. Yeah, because it's very hard, and we have to be mindful that, like, this is a useful thermometer of a segment of the military that's more career-minded, but we also have to realize that we're only dealing with 1,018 active duty service members who responded to this. So just, take that into consideration when we're talking about the data.
Thank you, Lauren, for bringing up the difference between the word pick and vote. I agree. I mean, it sounds trivial, but I think it's really important. And Shaun and I have had this back and forth conversation for a couple weeks now about the difference between Anglo-Saxon words and Latinate words. English is a mixture of both kind of Germanic Anglo-Saxon and the Latin and the French Latin. And so we have two words for everything. We have pick and select. Pick is Anglo-Saxon, select is Latin. And they have different connotations. The one is more formal. The one is much more casual. Just like you could pick a friend, you could pick a color of what'd you say? Nail.
Like a nail color.
Nail color.
Yeah.
Mine's clear today. For those watching on YouTube.
But select is more formal. But the other thing I wanted to say is I think we have to be careful not to overinterpret polls. I mean, I think that should go without saying that these polls come out and they make a big splash, but it's important not to overinterpret them. So I think it's important to point out that, Trump was never really that popular among the military. I mean, in 2017, his favorability rating was like 46%. Something like that.
2017, 44%.
44%. So it was never that high to begin with. His unfavorability in 2017 was 37%. So his unfavorability has risen, but it was already high to begin with. On the other hand, Trump is still more popular in the military than he is in the nation as a whole. I mean, that 50% unfavorability rating that he has now in this military poll compares to 55% unfavorability in the nation as a whole, and that's Gallup first week of August, taken at the same time. So Trump is still more popular in the military than he is in the nation as a whole, and I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, and speaking to your point about he wasn't necessarily popular to begin with, back in 2016, among the military, 83% of those surveyed said they were dissatisfied with Clinton as the Democrats' pick, and 65% said they were dissatisfied with Trump as the Republican nominee. Now, they also, in that poll, said that 4% of troops polled said that they were not confident that Clinton could lead the military, but 9% said that Trump could not lead the military.
That's extraordinarily
those are very low numbers.
That's unbelievably low for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if we're comparing it to the other side of the aisle, I do want to point out the previous president, his highest approval rating ever was 37%, which is lower than Trump's current low.
In the military, among the military.
Yeah, among active duty,
right.
Active duty service members or troops, which is another word that they use kind of interchangeably. Yeah. Throughout the years and throughout looking and scrubbing this data. One thing I'd love to add, because a PhD from Harvard named Pete Ferver kind of commented on this throughout the articles that we were reading. And he kind of asserts that, over time, it indicates dissatisfaction with Trump. And that's kind of shocking, and how he handles military issues. And he also asserts, and I'm going to quote, "These are people for whom morals and standards of the military mean a lot. The president has criticized the same career workers in the State Department and other agencies. And so it's possible that they're more likely to be offended by the president than other parts of the military." And that's kind of the piece of info I was searching for when we were talking about the average age. Because if you're 39, which I'm not yet, so I can't pretend to know what it's like to be 39, but they're saying that
1 month away.
I remember 39.
You know what's going on kind of more when you're a 39-year-old on the deep state and in the deep bureaucratic stuff that goes on in politics rather than when you're 29. And so I think Pete Ferver deserves a tip of the hat there for his comments.
Totally.
I still think that the central question of the poll is, why is a conservative Republican president who has increased the defense budget by 16% over his predecessor, who has, given the military pretty much everything that they've wanted in terms of, weaponry and pay raises and improvements, as James has said, healthcare and maybe even base life. Why isn't he more popular? Is it because the military suddenly become liberal Democrats? That I think that clearly isn't true. What, 16% of the people polled, 16% are Democrats of the people polled in this Military Times poll. That's extraordinarily low. 40% are Republicans or libertarians, 44% are third party or independents. They're not turning liberal. I think that the problem is with Trump, not with the change in military perspective.
When I read that article and I read the poll, the minute I got to the age, I pretty much stopped reading. I took a glance over, and it became almost biblical for me. When I was a child, I thought as a child. When I became a man, I had to put away my childish ways. At 39 years old in the Marine Corps, you can't sit here and think single focus. If your focus isn't larger than, look at the cool toys daddy bought me versus what's the cost of the cool toys and what is the effect daddy's having on my life and everybody around me, that's where the disapproval comes in.
How would this poll have been different? I want to ask Lauren and James. How do you think the poll would have been different? The results would have been different if the average age had been 24, if there had been junior enlisted included.
I don't know.
Do you think Trump is more popular with junior enlisted?
I don't know. What do you think, James?
I think that he is more popular at the lower levels, and for just those same facts. Like, I can't tell you how many countless arguments I have with people 10 years younger than me, because they're like, Trump is the greatest. I'm like, but is he?
Right. Well, I guess the generational divide would make sense. We're seeing that more and more these days. But I'll circle back because General Mattis was a 44-year Marine Corps veteran, James, and we talked on our last episode about you served 15, and and that's an amazing feat in itself. 44 years to retire as a general.
General Mattis was a god amongst men, according to the Marine Corps.
Yeah, exactly. So when he resigned, that I think that had a lot to do with it, both at 20-sums, 30-sums, whatever. Would that have changed your mind, James, as a Marine who had General Mattis as the Secretary of Defense, in 2018 when this whole thing went down about him disagreeing with Trump pulling the troops out of Syria? Like, how would you, if you were in right now and this age, would that have affected how you?
Oh, it affected me not even being in. The little things like that famous quote that he said to the Iraqis in 2003. I came here in peace. I didn't bring artillery with me, but I'm just going to leave it at that. The artillery unit he had was mine. We were already tracked into what he was about to do.
Yeah. This
man's a god amongst men. And so it was funny, even when he got let go, of all the young Marines going, General Mattis ain't this, that, and another. He's not, blah, blah. And all the older ones are going, whoa, wait a minute. You don't understand the gravity of somebody like a General Mattis, a General McMaster's. Like, those aren't
General Kelly.
Like, these aren't just your regular run-of-the-mill, we call Be My Little General, Brigadier General, Lieutenant, this ain't a little guy. These are people who answer directly to presidents. These are ones who led whole forces into war. these aren't people to be taken lightly when they speak, because
Yeah.
that, like we said earlier, when he speaks, he's already thought about it. So he's going to be very cautious about what he says. He's going to make sure that his plan is set forth. You're going to be able to grab the whole picture that he sees. And if this is the guy that he's responding to who could just fly off the hip, they're already going to, they're bumping heads already, just off of how to approach people, how to convey your convictions or your thoughts. These aren't the same people. We're on two different playing fields.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I mean, I think you just hit it. That's
Totally.
The bottom line of this poll is, I think Donald Trump ran as a disruptor. He ran as an outsider. He ran as a populist, anti-establishment, kind of anti-institution conservative. And I think at the beginning, the military, you know, just kind of hoped that he might fall in line, that he might become more establishment. I think he's too unpredictable. I think he's too disruptive. He's doing what he pledged he was going to do. He's disrupting alliances. He's, you know, threatening to pull out of the START treaty with Russia. He's getting closer ties with Russia. Yeah, it's I think all, he's not, you know, following the decision-making authorities. He's talked about how he doesn't like the, you know, general staff. And I just think it's just too much. I think that the reason why 59% of the officers polled in this poll disapprove, have an unfavorable view of Trump, is because he's too disruptive.
Which brings me to our next headline. In coming out of sort of negative headlines for Trump, there's something that also came out, that he is going to save Stars and Stripes from the chopping block. You know, the DoD memo from August 4th leaked, ordered that Stars and Stripes was going to shut down. Then September 30th, there was going to be a cut of $15 million per year support. This has been planned since February. Stars and Stripes gets 35% of the DoD budget. News breaks of the Atlantic article. Trump reverses his own administration's decision and saves the Stars and Stripes. We were talking a bit before starting our recording with James about the Stars and Stripes. How important is Stars and Stripes? Lauren, also, did you have Stars and Stripes on ship?
I remember reading it. To be honest, I thought a lot about this question. I don't think on ship I had much time to do much of anything. If I wasn't on watch, I was sleeping. If I wasn't doing that, I was eating or on the smoke deck getting some fresh air. But I know that it's an important, I remember being like in medical offices and things like that. And I think it's definitely an important publication. What I want to add to what you said about the facts of this are, Shaun, that yes, even though the president tweeted that he's going to save it, the Pentagon has yet to respond, you know, to that tweet. And in reality, it's Congress who has to approve the budget for fiscal year 2021. And if it's not in there for Stars and Stripes, it doesn't really matter what the president tweets.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I just want to, you know, for our listeners to just clear that up really quick.
Thank you. Todd, you have some history about Stars and Stripes. How long has this been around?
Oh, I thank God you asked me that question. Yes. Stars and Stripes is not just a kind of a great military newspaper. It's a great newspaper on an international scale. I mean, it's a legend. It has, you know, origins back in the Civil War and World War I, but the Stars and Stripes we know is a direct descendant of the one that was founded in 1942 during World War II. And it was funded by, you know, the War Department. It was funded by the United States Army. But it retained this editorial independence, this journalistic integrity, even during the war, even during the censorship of the war, that it became a really trusted source of information for troops on the ground. The Stars and Stripes would defy Army brass. It angered generals. It angered presidents over the decades. And editors were always told, I'll put it this way, that because this is a direct quote, if you're not pissing off the brass hats in Washington, then you're not doing your job. I mean, if you're not kind of upsetting the powers that be, then you're not being a real independent newspaper. So Stars and Stripes has a great history of independence and journalistic integrity. And I think it's a revered institution in the military and among historians and journalists.
Something worthy of being saved, definitely.
Is it true that it goes back to the Civil War, Todd? I read that in prepping for this. And then I was going to say again, is that where your buddy Bill Malden started with to illustrate his cartoons? Was that the medium he used?
Thank you for asking that question, Lauren. I am so grateful. You and Shaun, I'll send you a $20 bill in the mail. Stars and Stripes did begin with a bunch of soldiers from Illinois in Bloomfield, I think it's Bloomfield, Missouri. They were over the border. It was, to get Missouri under control. And they founded this newspaper, the National Tribune and Stars and Stripes. And that's the beginning of Stars and Stripes. Then it went out of publication after the war. It was revived in World War I, and a number of really important people in the history of journalism, Harold Ross, the most famously, kind of recreated Stars and Stripes for World War I, was immediately, Harold Ross would go on to later found the New Yorker. It was immediately very popular among the troops. And then in World War II, it really blossomed. And the way it would work would be each editorial office, as American troops kind of expanded throughout the world, they would take a beachhead in Sicily. One of the first things they'd do is open up a Sicily edition of Stars and Stripes, and then they'd hit the mainland Italy, and they'd have a Naples edition of Stars and Stripes, and the Rome edition. So by the end of the war, you had over a dozen editions, each of them very independent of each other, fiercely independent of their point of view. And yes, that's exactly where it had more readers than any other newspaper in the world at the time. And that's exactly where the great cartoonist Bill Malden emerged from Stars and Stripes.
We will put the link to purchase Todd's book down here. We're doing it right down there. Lauren, you are reading it. How are you enjoying it?
Oh, come on.
I know.
We'll edit this part out.
It's great. She thinks it's great.
I think it's great.
2 thumbs up.
It helps with insomnia.
Speaking to your point, Lauren, yeah, hopefully this tweet actually does have Congress put the budget back in. It seems like it's a worthwhile publication, especially great for our active duty. James, you had mentioned that you read it on base. Did you have any thoughts on it?
My thoughts were, it's a very important newspaper that, when you have time to read all the little segments in it, it provides a lot of knowledge for while you're in a grander view of things, like we spoke about before. Even has information for veterans once they get out. A lot of things, a lot of leads to, if you do a little bit of homework on a lot of the blurbs and blogs, it'll lead you to other places doing great things. So this way you're not by yourself if you take the time to read it. And it's more than just a newspaper. They have a YouTube presence. They have a Twitter presence. They document on things, all things veteran or active duty to even video gaming. I think it's which you were featured for. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they do that. They talk to certain they just talk to people who are just trying to do good work for active duty and veterans, and that's a really great thing, especially in a world where information comes fast and heavy and you don't always know where to find your way or find the information. It's there in Stars and Stripes. They have a great reputation of, I won't say being on the right side of history, but definitely being on the right side of right. They're not going to just post an article without doing the science and the research, and to do it well. And I that's the reason I've always loved Stars and Stripes.
I'll echo that as a veteran. Yeah, a reliable news source. And I hope that the Pentagon rescinds the shutdown order before, like Shaun said, September 30th, because that is the drop dead date there.
Yeah, and I'll just say that it doesn't cost the Department of Defense that much. The DoD only subsidizes the paper 35% of its budget, $15 million. That's 1/1000th of 1% of the $700+ billion that the Department of Defense spends each year. So it's a minuscule. The money was not the issue. I think it was the politics. It was, like the Obama administration wanted to cut back Stars and Stripes. I think every presidential administration kind of would love to curtail the power of Stars and Stripes. And I'll just say one more thing. I find it so interesting now that when servicemen and women are deployed overseas, they're often in places, Asia, Africa, Middle East, where they don't want bad guys to be tracking them on their mobile devices, so they're not allowed to use mobile devices. So Stars and Stripes is increasingly printing up the good old-fashioned paper newspapers and shipping them overseas for servicemen and women to read.
That's great. So I want to move on to our main story. And last episode, we talked about who serves. And now we want to get a little bit more in depth and talk about what motivates people to serve. Why do they serve? Todd, last time you made the big assumption that people join because they have no other options. And you're about half right. Liberals tend to say people join out of desperation for employment opportunities, and conservatives tend to say that people join for patriotic love of country. But which one is more true? And it's actually pretty close. If we break it down to institutional, sort of family and duty, and occupational, professional development, job stability, you'll find in a recent RAND study that though a lot of them are looking at economic reasons, there's a pretty decent split.
Yeah, it's amazing how all over the place these answers are. If you ask people a simple question, if you ask Lauren, why did you join the Navy? It's not a simple answer, is it?
It's not. And in fact, in our line of veteran storytelling, I know it's one of your favorite questions because people truly want to know, right? And it's my least favorite question to answer. I wonder if anyone can tell me the statistic, but it seems overwhelming to me how many people join when they're 17 years old. I mean, especially in previous wars and generations, but 90-some-year-old veteran Emily Drake told me on a podcast a few years ago she changed her own birth certificate just to join at 15 years old or something like on this. So, I mean, and so trying to answer that question, going back to Lauren as a 17-year-old kid, I might have an idea that's taken form since then, where my adult brain can formulate maybe why or look back, but it's my least favorite question to answer because it's a lengthy answer. And
yeah, I'm sorry, that's interesting. And I wonder if you asked this, if we were able to go back in time and ask the 17-year-old Lauren, why did you join? I wonder what you'd say or what you think you would have said and how that would differ from what the answer that you would give now.
Can I ask one question? When you were 17, when was this? I'm not trying to throw your age underneath the bus.
I'm 37, so I joined in 2000. I was 17 years old in the year 2000.
So we joined at the same time. All right. Because I think that'll always be my part one of that question. When you joined when? That plays because I came in 2000. Lauren can tell you the same thing. The age was right around the same. A lot of the stories are the same. But after 2003, that shifted.
Oh, big time.
That was a huge shift. And that's where the mass of your everything being everywhere and scattered, that'll play a trick.
I found it interesting at our VBC events, that same question of when did you join? If it was in 2000, that's pre 9/11. There's not this upswell of pride and national defense and let's go get the enemy. There was a more subdued. The world wasn't in turmoil. If I remember 2000 well. Out of this survey, there were different responses: call to serve, family history, which is a big one, honor, respect, always dreamt of it. There's also adventure, travel, benefits, job stability, opportunity to see the world or to get out of your economic situation. Do any of those ring true to you, Lauren?
Yeah, actually, when I was going over your my list of options, if I had to put myself in a category, I would say that like fleeing from a desperate situation, right, but not in the traditional sense. you know, I was graduating high school. I had my choice of college. My parents were going to be able to afford to send me, you know, wherever I wanted. But you know, my father said you have a 6-hour radius, right? So it was like, you can have your freedom, but under our you know, guidelines. And I think for me, once I realized that I could earn my own money to go to college, and I could travel at the same time, it all just kind of looked really appealing to me. Maybe the recruiters just did a good job with this case. But yeah, I think I would have to say maybe for the school money, the travel, the adventure, not just your typical, what I used to call it, 8-4-4, you know, 8 years in school and 4 years in high school and 4 years in college. I kind of, you know, that wasn't my path, I don't think, at the time.
Right. James, what about you? Why did you decide to serve?
My grandfather served. My cousins' family all served. So in our family it was honorable. So it was no thing there. And I wasn't exactly going anywhere. College was not an option. Um, Beaver County in 1999 wasn't always the greatest. It wasn't a great place to find a job, and if without the college degree, it was a wrap. So I needed to do something. My Italian family said you need to go because you can handle it. So I went. And knowing that in my family it was nothing out of, you know, nothing bad. You know, everybody, a lot of my family only did like 4 years. I think I have one cousin who swore he would never leave Germany, and he's lived that truth. He's been there for 20, 30 years now. The minute he went over there, he was like, yeah, I'm never leaving. I'm like, all right, great. We'll see you when I see you then. But no, it's an honorable thing. So there was no sweat for that.
And can I ask James really quick, Shaun, like, yeah, when people ask me that, I don't want to say, oh, because I was, you know, filled to my gills with honor, or because it was a calling, or like this higher thing, because that makes me sound, you know, kind of arrogant or something. But like,
Way more grandiose,
yeah,
grandiose than it was, right?
totally. And that's what they want to hear. It's like, because I just had all my stuff together at 17 years old, and I was filled with honor and courage and commitment, and I wanted to, you know, serve my country. But there was sort of like, once I found out that this option existed, it became like this magnet, you know, that I really, it was a moth to a flame. So there was something about that was sort of a pulling or a calling. But perhaps the reason I don't like the question is because I don't quite know how to say that right without sounding like, you know, arrogant or whatever.
Is that a way of just like, my answer's not going to live up to whatever ideal you have in your head?
Probably, yeah.
Boy, that's a light bulb moment for me, because, you know, I think we're going to tackle this idea of saying thank you for your service, and you can see how that can be a difficult thing to say or answer or hear, and also how to answer in some way to make you see what, one, my younger self was deciding on, and two, what you think of the reason I would serve is, and might not be the reason that I served, and that might be disappointing to you. And why should I answer that? That's so intriguing to me.
Totally. This all reminds me, this is something I just popped in my head. I remember, you know, when I was doing some research on immigration, and there was a great survey done of people who had immigrated to the United States between 1890 and 1920. And this person this researcher wanted to get at why people came over. And he ends up getting about 40 different answers. I didn't like my mother-in-law's face. I got into a fight with my brother. I didn't like the weather. You know, I mean, it just like people just will give you the reasons that they were at the very top of their minds when they left. You have to really do some digging to find the underlying patterns, because you'll have one brother who stayed home while the other brother, just 2 years older, leaves. So much of it does depend on like temperament. Like somebody like Lauren who wanted to get away, she might just have like that little bit of an interest in adventure and a little bit of a call to service that pushes her in that direction. Whereas if you had a sister who went a different direction, maybe she didn't have it. And so I think it's this combination of like kind of underlying forces and then temperamental differences. That's really interesting.
And mentors and influence probably.
Yep.
As someone comes up to you at the mall and you love the uniform. I've heard that. And, I think that's very interesting. The question I was going to ask James is, and I want to also ask you, Lauren, is why the branch? So why Marine Corps?
Because that's the only branch of service, right, James? That's right.
No, it's not the only branch of service. Actually, a lot of my family went Army. A lot of my family went Army. The Marine Corps, for me, all jokes, they were ready. I was ready. Let's dance.
Yeah.
And I already had I remember the dress blues when I was 17 in the schools. They were sexy. They were pretty. I ain't gonna lie. I was like, I was a sharp boy. But what I tried for the Army and it almost went through. My cousin called me and said, "You're not a bullet sponge. You're smarter than that." And my other cousin came home from the Army and said, "Don't do it. Go Air Force, go Navy." And I was like, "What about the Marine Corps?" And they're like, "No, they're crazy." I'm like, define crazy. And then I talked to a recruiter and they're like, "Hey, what do you like doing?" I'm like, "Well, I like computers and things like that." And he's like, "Do you like blowing stuff up?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Then you should totally do the '08 field." And I'm like, "What's the '08 field?" He's like, "Basically, you'll sit in a tent, you'll have a computer, they'll point out a target, you blow it up with a large cannon." Sign me up, fam. I'm in. Great 15
Lauren?
years.
Love it.
Lauren, why the Navy?
I have no idea. I really don't. Like, again, there was a recruiting poster on where I worked at my dad's store. There was a Navy recruiting poster. And the more that I reference that, I honestly don't remember if it was there before I decided to join or if like the recruiter affixed it to the door after I decided to join, because I do remember the recruiter coming in there. I think it was just, like they say, like a crime of opportunity. Like maybe the Navy, I wandered into their office one day and they saw this young woman, this kid, this girl, and they capitalized on that. Cause I didn't like go branch shopping, in a strip mall anywhere, but I do remember all of the offices were in this like kind of same hallway. And I never went into the other offices. It was always, so I truly don't know why I chose the Navy, but I did.
Almost all recruits have an economic reason or occupational reason for joining, and almost all recruits have another kind of cultural reason or temperamental reason for joining. And it's just this interesting combination that everybody has. Some people are more towards the economic occupational end of the spectrum. That's been motivating them to join. Others are on the patriotic or the adventure or get out of Dodge, motivation, and they're at that end of the spectrum. I also think this is something we didn't bring up last time. We could talk about more in the future, but one big determining factor of whether or not you're going to join the military is how close do you live to a military base. It's remarkable that has a huge impact. The farther you live away from a military base, the less likely you are to join it, because you don't know people who serve, you don't have a family who serves. If you live in a military town like Fayetteville, North Carolina, they send twice as many recruits as Manhattan does, but Manhattan has 8 times the population. So the closer you are to a base, the more likely you are to serve.
And going back, sort of breaking down this survey in some of the data, that only 81 E1 to E4s took this survey that we read the article on, and 46% economic reasons, 9% entirely were called to serve. Like we said, it was a bit all over the map, but it doesn't necessarily speak to that you have multiple reasons. It's not just money, it's not just benefits, it's not just skill training. We also have a map from a recent New York Times article discussing who signs up and from where. And the map shows 1998, near the time, Lauren, when you enlisted, James, when you enlisted, and now 2 years ago, 2018. And we were really interested to see how the counties that are highlighted of where people are coming into the army or into the military from, and that it has shifted dramatically. You look at the map and you see 1998, you see that not very many counties in Nevada have enlistees, but you jump cut 20 years ahead to 2018 and large portions of Nevada have people joining in. It's interesting looking state by state, because Florida is the same way. Not many in 1998, a whole bunch in 2018. Why the shift in geography of where people are serving from?
Well, I think some of this is base consolidation and base closures in the north. In the Northeast, you have military bases that are closing because you can't do the proper training year round. And especially for the kind of wars that we were fighting in the 2000s. And so you have this shift of the training down south. The southern bases are getting bigger. The populations there are getting bigger. So you have the recruits who are being recruited near the bases. That's one of the reasons. I also think, yeah, James, what do you think?
I'm looking at that 2018 one. In my head, I want to overlay an actual map and see how many big cities surround a lot of that, because in that North Carolina, South Carolina, into Florida, I can visually see without a map overlaying, that's 95 going down the coast.
Yeah.
That's 17 going along the water, and 85 going into Georgia, and part of 20 going across to Florida. And if you've driven anywhere, you know what's on those roads? Nothing.
We'll put a link to that very interesting 2018 New York Times article that includes that map here in our show page, right, Shaun?
Definitely. Well, I'd like to move on to our Scuttlebutt round to see if there's any interesting tidbits coming out of the military headlines this past week. Who would like to go first? I feel like I need a coin. I could just flip a coin and pick someone.
We should put a spinner on the screen here.
Spinner. That would be great.
Overlay a spinner. That'd be so cool.
Well, mine's a quick soundbite. So if you want to put me in, whenever you want, mine's a quick soundbite today.
Let's go ahead.
Let's go with you first.
All right, James, don't get mad at me. Marines were served moldy sandwiches. Okay, it was in recent news in Okinawa, Japan. A bunch of Marines were in quarantine, and they were served moldy sandwiches over the course of 5 days. They were told by their chain of command to eat around the mold, a site source. So these prepackaged sandwiches were from a vendor, and they were being delivered to these Marines that were in quarantine in Okinawa, and apparently they were meant to be disposed of, but someone accidentally just started serving them to these poor Marines. And they say they were even threatened by the command that if they shared it on social media, that there would be heck to pay. So what do you think about that, Scuttlebutt? I know when I was a kid, my dad used to serve me moldy bagels in the morning, and he would scrape off the mold, and he would watch me and make me eat it, and then I would cry, and then he would say, "It's penicillin, it's good for you." I mean, but I was a kid then. I wasn't a Marine. So what do you guys think about these poor Marines getting fed moldy sandwiches that were 2 years expired?
James?
Oh, it's going to go right to me, right to the Marine that would have told him to scrape off the mold and eat around it. Do you understand what that does for your system if you can handle it? That's why I wasn't worried about the coronavirus. At this point, with the things that I have eaten, the random things I've been shot with, I'm not worried.
I was gonna say at least it happened to Marines, because I feel like they've been through.
Right. If it had been any other branch, oh my goodness, they'd have burnt down the base. Marines eat it. We'll be fine.
Right? You try to give Air Force some moldy sandwiches, I think we wouldn't have an Air Force left.
They're calling the lobster. Was it that lobster truck? You better bring that truck on in. We ain't eating this moldy sandwich. We're sitting in the corner, but we'll around it, no problem. I ain't got a problem with this. This is absolutely amazing.
I'm crying.
That's
James.
a hard act to follow. That's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, that really is. James, you got a Scuttlebutt for us?
Not at this time, actually. She actually found the same one I found not too long ago, and I was like, "This is great. This is the greatest thing ever." I'm so happy that she found it and got to speak on it. This makes me happy. It means that my cherished Marine Corps still lives up to a certain standard. Pain is weakness leaving the body, and at
Bam.
this point, no matter how it comes out,
Yeah.
eat your moldy sandwich. It's gonna be good for you later.
I'll go next. I'll save you for last, Todd. I read up on something that was called Paddling to Persevere. Nate D'Onofre, who is one of the owners of the nonprofit Courage Incorporated, he canoed the entire Mississippi River with a veteran friend of his, Don Jokinen. They did 2,300 miles. They did this to raise money for people with disabilities and veterans with disabilities. This has been, I've seen a lot of this lately, people starting nonprofits to help disabled veterans get out into the wild, get out into wilderness, be able to become one with nature and have adventures. Nate himself is a double amputee. He was born with amniotic band syndrome, and he lost both of his legs when he was just a baby. But that didn't stop him. He usually adventures in the Michigan's Upper Peninsula and the Northeast Wisconsin area. And Don was injured serving in the National Guard, the Army National Guard in Iraq from 2007 to 2008. I thought this was really sort of inspiring and interesting. They did the entire Mississippi River. The more you look into this, the more you hear about veterans doing things like this, motorcycling across the country, walking across the country to raise awareness for certain veteran issues. And I wanted to highlight them and tip the hat to them.
I'll definitely give them creds for alliteration in their name. I like that. That's catchy.
Yeah.
My Scuttlebutt brings together the issue of the military and politics, active duty, and also this upcoming election that we have on November 3rd, which is going to be held in an unprecedented context of a global pandemic. How are people going to get to the polls? How are people going to be able to vote? Will mail-in voting be allowed? Absentee balloting, all that kind of stuff. And that was also an issue in 1864. The Civil War was going on. Abraham Lincoln was running for re-election, and things did not look good for him at all. The war was very unpopular in the North in 1864, mainly because the casualty rates were off the charts. I mean, nobody had ever seen casualty rates like in the Civil War. I mean, more people were killed in the Civil War than all our other wars combined. That's still true. And, 50,000 people were killed and wounded in 8 years of the Revolutionary War. 50,000 people were killed and wounded 3 days at Gettysburg. I mean, it was just, there had been no precedent for this kind of catastrophe. Lincoln was increasingly unpopular, and he knew in the summer of 1864 that he was not going to win re-election, that his adversary, who was his own general, George McClellan, a Democrat, was probably going to win, and that McClellan, the first thing he would do would be to sue for peace with the South with slavery intact. That caused Lincoln to do a major thing that doesn't get enough attention, and that is to bring the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass to the White House and have a special meeting with him in August 1864 and arrange that Douglass begin a guerrilla campaign to help slaves escape the South before McClellan is elected and sues for peace. But as we know, Lincoln did win re-election, and he won really only because of the soldier vote. He suspected, there wasn't polling in those days, but he suspected that if his soldiers, hundreds of thousands who were in the field, spread out across the country, if they were able to vote, they might put him over the top. And they did. They came out 80% in favor of Abraham Lincoln for president. And the only reason they got to vote is Lincoln was able to arrange with each state, most states, to allow mail-in voting so that soldiers could vote from the field, to allow absentee ballots so soldiers can vote, when they're in bivouac somewhere. There are some states that didn't like Lincoln in the North and so didn't allow that. Lincoln was able to arrange with the units, the commanders of those units in the field to maybe call off the war for a few days so that polling sites could be opened up and soldiers could vote in person. And so there was this big soldier turnout that really involved a lot of changing of the voting rules that allowed Abraham Lincoln to prevail in 1864. And he didn't win by a huge landslide. It was 55-45.
Wow.
You said 80% of the troops were in favor.
I think like 78% of the Union soldiers voted for Lincoln, which was
That
not,
does
which
not
was,
surprise me.
it was a surprise at the time. At the time, it was, people thought, why would you vote for the president who's sending you, into war to die?
Be-
But when you interviewed, and there were interviews with soldiers who explained it, they said, like, I'm fighting this war. I got to be behind the guy who's, the commander in chief.
Well, then it's kind of like the reason why I love the VBC so much. A lot of people ask a lot of veterans questions like, why do you have this new viewpoint after you deployed? If the Union soldiers saw slave conditions, what's one of the movies? Band of Brothers. You start thinking different about a people when you have to interact with them. And that is a very powerful thing. Like, so that was then, Band of Brothers, and then I'll go to my own. And when I came home and you're hearing, we should bomb them all out, like, whoa, 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 whoa. The people that we're fighting against, they're just dumb. No, they're not. Like, you like sitting here, like, seriously, like, don't have this conversation around me. I don't want to have this conversation because they're a lot smarter than you give them credit for. You don't understand that in their schools, they learn English at like the 3rd grade, whether they finish school or not. So while you're sitting there and you're hearing them speak in their native tongue and you're trying to speak to them, some of them know what you're saying. They're playing you for stupid. You just don't know it yet. And it's like, you got to give credit where credit is due across the board. Again, prefrontal cortex. I'm not a child anymore. You start learning things. You have to give credit where credit's due. So that's that vote going for him at that time. That I'm not shocked by it, because a lot of those Union soldiers saw those plantations. Not all of them were good. Some of them saw the way people were treated. It wasn't all great. And then historically, just like you were saying before, a lot of people came into the service, and it wasn't just because of honor of service. Sometimes those up north places, if they weren't in an industry where their parents weren't trying to, get them into education, what else were they going to do?
Right.
That
does it for episode 2 of the Scuttlebutt in the books. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube, on Facebook. Listen to us on our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. Again, we are a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, PA, connecting veterans to heal, educate, heal, and inspire. We are a 501c3. We are a nonprofit. We're all the things.
All right.
We are here to
I had a
connect
good time today.
This was a
Thank
home
you
run.
all.
Home run.
Definitely.